gaps in my knowledge. I know quite a bit about public libraries. Well, I worked in academic libraries and was then a library science professor. I've been married to two women who have worked in public libraries, including the current one seated right over there. And again, the other thing, people talk about banned books, and that's probably not the right term, and I accept the criticism. We're talking more about challenged books, and the numbers that actually get banned is much less known than the ones that get challenged. So being challenged doesn't mean it's taken away. The American Library Association is moving to challenge instead of banned in many cases. I can't and I won't comment on anything that's going on in the library here. I don't know enough to answer any questions. We will have our person here from Dearborn that can talk about it. The other thing is that you're getting a new presentation tonight over what I've done with this in the past because of some rather what I consider horrendous developments recently. So I'm going to go through my first little introductory part, then I'm going to talk about recent things, and then I'm actually going to go back to talk about a more intense discussion of how it is still in many parts of the country that haven't been, how should I say it, infected by censorship. And all right, let's go. This is the First Amendment. I'm not going to read it. It's got multiple components. Actually, when it's going to come up later, we'll be petitioning the government, where I will say that if it's a First Amendment right to want to keep the books, it's also a First Amendment right to tell your governing body that you want them to be removed from the library. So it's legally. The other thing that most people may not know is that the United States has probably the most how should I say it, firm protections of free speech of any country in the world. We're here not too far away, but I'm going to go down and say that if you were in just a few miles to the south in Canada and you denied the Holocaust, you could go, and people have gone to jail. So we have more protections than most countries. Hate speech is legal unless it leads to violence. And so I could say bunches of nasty things about everybody and it would be totally legal. I might get beat up, but that's another question. But that much of the nasty things that people say, it is not illegal under the First Amendment. They have also had a recent court case with that lying on your resume is legal. They were going to prosecute people who put military medals on their resume that weren't true, and the Supreme Court said that's just fine. It's up to the employer to check whether they're legal or not. I would also say that right now, contrary to what many people believe, sexual content between consenting adults is legal. There is no prosecution and no illegality today for all of those porn sites you can find on the internet. And we'll need to talk a bit more about that later. And the rules are different for those who are under 18, but they still have First Amendment rights. And this will come up most in the setting of school libraries. But given the fact that I've added the new content, I'm not going to talk much at all about school libraries, which are in a very, very different situation. Oh, one last thing. If anybody has a real important brief question, put your hand up and I will answer as we go through.
The hate speech. If I call you a no good 4 eyes, and then I punch you.
You can't punch me.
I can't punch. That would be leading to violence. But if you punched me because
I would be the one violating the law.
Oh, the lead to violence is what I'm. How does it lead to the lead?
Okay. If you incite people by your speech to commit illegal acts, that is not protected by the First Amendment. If you are just saying horrible, hateful things, it's okay. So I can go around insulting everybody I see, using bad ethnic, racial, religious, whatever, and that is completely legal in the United States.
And you can't, and if you said that hate speech and someone retaliated with violence, that would not,
No, if
That
they
their action would be
beat me up,
assault.
they'd be
But
violating
if-
the law.
what's that?
If they beat me up, they'd be violating the law.
It'd be violated, but if you insulted like all of us as library smarty pantses, and let's just say that's a protected category. And then I'm doing it the wrong way. If you said that
Go out and kill all the.
go out and kill
That's
all
insane.
the people who don't come to the library, and we ran out and everybody
Okay, that would be one of those difficult cases. If you said, I hate library users and think they're stupid people that should be shut up, that would be completely legal. If you said anything and let's go out and attack them, then you're getting into the disputed area.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, all right. Okay, the first. Oh, wait, am I missing?
There you go.
Okay. Okay, all right. The application of the First Amendment. The First Amendment does not apply to private bodies. So this is an issue of what the government can do at any level to restrict speech or censor materials. Non-public libraries and charter schools can do what they want. So for example, it has been determined that for this plus the separation of church and state, you can't teach against evolution in a public school because that is a valid scientific doctrine. If you're not a public school, if you're not receiving federal funding or state funding, it's just fine. The reason why over-the-air broadcasts are legally regulated is that they have been determined to be public body. Congress has passed the law, and so you can regulate them. But cable television is not subject to those regulations because you invite cable television into your home by subscribing. So pretty much anything that is legal you can do on cable television, you could not do it on the network pump. And we all know how much network television is slipping these days. Okay, and it only protects from government censorship. Let me give you an example that might make it clearer. That if this library has a policy for using this meeting room, they cannot tell any group, whether it's the Ku Klux Klan, Anfita, or the Satanic Temple, that they can't rent the room if they follow the rules for renting the room. So because this is a public government agency, they have to be what is called content neutral. Does that distinction make sense?
Yes.
But the other things can do whatever they want. Also, the states, since about, I think it was about the 1830s, are subject to all the rules in the Constitution, so they cannot regulate speech either. And this is right now, when I get a little bit further, many of the cases that are going through the courts. And again, just to repeat, there are protections if you're under 18. They're not as strong, but they still do exist. So in other words, and sometimes, okay, I just say it now, one of the weirdest things, and this happened in Michigan, is the age of consent in Michigan is 16. So the young man and the young lady could have sex, but since they photographed it, they were arrested because you had to be 18 to do that. And she wasn't, or he wasn't 18. I don't know why we always paint the male as the villain. But anyway, so we can run into very strange situations. Okay, the next level up is censorship. And this is whoever wants to remove objectionable materials. So if Musk wants to remove stuff from Twitter,
X.
it changed the name. That would be censorship, but there's nothing illegal about it. So there's a difference between censorship and what is illegal. And so once again, private bodies can do what they want. And non-chartered religious schools as well as private libraries are not covered by the First Amendment. And there are some religious schools that make sure that they don't accept any funding of any sort from the government that would stop them from doing what they want to do. And that is completely legal. So if the school wants to teach intelligent design, if it wants to do other things that can be done in the public school, that doesn't matter, but that is still censorship. The highest level is intellectual freedom. And what intellectual freedom means is that you're not only trying to remove material, but you're feeling the obligation to provide a broad range of materials on various topics. And most of the time, there's also some issues there I'll get to later, the public library is expected to provide a broad range of materials on various viewpoints. There are limits to it, but I'll talk about that later. And not all viewpoints can be presented in any public library because they're just not large enough. I mean, I have no idea what this library has, but I doubt that it has many materials on a religion practiced by 600 people somewhere in the other part of the world, but they should have religious materials that are relevant to the people that live within their service district. So again, the larger the public library, the most likely intellectual freedom will apply because they will have more opportunities to build a large collection. All right, the public library has the obligation to provide materials for both information and for reading of its user community. And so the public library in some way should focus on what the needs of the people in this audience are, and they can vary what they collect based somewhat on these needs. So it is supposed to then not have one perspective, but divergent perspectives. Sometimes this can be very funny because I know of a case in which the director of the library said he did not have to include any LGBTQ materials because none of these people lived in his service district. And I believe that that's something that was be very, very impossible. Or you need to say, I can't deal with these viewpoints against the majority religion in our community because 90% of the people belong to religion X. But the 10% then still need to have materials that they find welcoming to view their points. But that doesn't mean, though, that you can't more heavily favor the things that will be checked out in your library as long as you don't completely disregard other viewpoints. So not circulating can be a reason for reducing and minimizing certain types of materials. It should be that people who want to explore the world, that's one of the best things that happened to me. I was one of those library nerds during the summer, read a book a day. And so I learned all these things about the world, and it was wonderful. And we'll talk some more later also about contentious issues. So if you have a contentious debated issue, you should be presenting materials on both sides. And what it says here, I like this, it's a mirror and a window. It's a mirror of its user, but it also offers the window to the outside world. So in other words, you should be able to find things that expand your horizons, as well as those materials that support what you already believe. All right, this is the part I'm adding. Things have become a lot more difficult within the last few years. And ALA reports a 92% increase in titles challenged in 2023 and public libraries. And it's 240, and that's only the ones that have been reported to them. So there's obviously many other more books that have been challenged. And the battle over First Amendment rights has shifted from the federal government, where there have not been any changes, to the states and the localities. So there are many initiatives to reduce access to materials in various states in the country. Fortunately, Michigan is lucky, and we have not seen many of the activities, but we've not been completely immune, and I won't go into details on that, but I know of cases where there are problems in Michigan. There is either a law that has been passed or is going through the Michigan legislature that it will make challenging and removing books more difficult. And the other thing is that there are organized national groups who are creating materials that they then give to their followers in the local communities that tells them this is exactly what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to do it. Here we have, you don't have to read the whole book. We'll give you the passages that we think are the most objectionable, and we will use those passages. And so there are this case where that's happening. Actually, there are real cases where there have been efforts to close the library or reduce its funding if it doesn't agree with the powerful groups in the area that also may have the political power to actually do this. And so this is a current danger. And the next one is actually very important. In Michigan right now, if you went and you found the most hideous, horrid, illegal book in the collection, let's say it's We Should Kill All the, all right, let's just say it could have legal, you couldn't sue the librarian because the librarian was legally immune from being arrested for the books they brought into the library. And some states have or are working to have that changed, so that the librarian becomes much more conscious, because he or she could be arrested if somebody finds something that the court says is obscene, and then they would be, they would have legal problems because they let it into their library. The other issue is at times is creating lists of acceptable materials. So again, this is probably more likely to happen at the school level, public school level, but these are the materials that you should have in your collection. And then they will also have lists of these are the materials that you shouldn't have. There is actually one state that is trying to control what publishers sell to the libraries, and they're telling the publishers that you too will be in trouble if you sell to the libraries the books that we consider are objectionable. And then giving parents more direct control. There's also something that says if any parent objects to any book, you're going to remove it, and then you're going to have to go through a big procedure to get it back. And so that is happening. One of the things that bothers me is that I wish that there would be more parents who had the opposing viewpoints that would come in and defend these materials. There's also firing librarians who don't support censorship. This really does happen. I know of this case because I'm on a body that gives small monetary grants to librarians who are being fired because of this, and so it does happen. And there are social media again, there's lots of nasty things occurring there that are legal, and some of these nasty things are directed towards your local librarians. So that they will say that, you know, this person, blankety blank, has dirty books, and sometimes then that means that they get mounting attacks, including death threats. So I know of librarians who have received death threats. I'm not sure if they're serious or not, because of the fact that they are not resisting it. I don't know how to say it without using the term. On the other hand, I also think there are times when it is probably not a good idea to thumb your nose at your communities. And so while having a drag queen story hour is completely legal, and I can see reasons for doing it, I would also say it's a marginally risky though legal behavior. Yes.
I have a question. So if there's a person who has a problem with material in the library, they file charges against them and remove the book. Do the information go out to the community that this person is doing this before they take it out of the library?
Okay,
Or-
we'll go through the challenge process later. There's normally formal procedures. What this does in this case is that if the challenge is determined to be successful, then there is a possibility that the librarian could suffer for it too, in addition to having the book removed from the collection. And so this is the scary part. Most librarians don't want to go to jail, so this is a good way to influence them to be more careful about it. And finally, yes.
Yeah, it bothers me that, they're going back to states' rights, which is a federalist position. And states' rights was what justified slavery.
Okay,
States' rights was justified the unequal education of African Americans. And we're now going, and then you go into the period where McCarthy was.
okay, that's the answer. These things are going through the courts now.
Yeah, but under the present court, they're
But-
finding, they absolved
They're
the president.
they're often taking this to the federal level. The issue is now we have a fair number of federal level judges who are also supportive of censorship. So you're bringing up a good point. And I know that there are many people that are unhappy with some of the decisions of the Supreme Court. And I don't know what to say, except that I hope the rights of free speech win. And that we don't get into a point where you can just gut the library collection.
Because if McCarthyism happened and it was going on for quite a long time where everybody was afraid of what they could say or do.
Okay, I'm old enough to remember McCarthy on television, the hearings. I didn't understand them at that point, but I remember my mother watching them. And finally, this is something that also happens, is that the groups systematically check out all the books they disagree with, so they can't fall into the hands of other people. This supposedly actually happened in Michigan when we had a library director who very much felt that Madonna's book on sex should be in the public library because all public libraries bought all New York Times books, and so bestsellers, so why didn't they buy this one? And then how should I say it? The librarians who were worried about it said, we can't buy it because you would have heard this later, so I won't talk about it later. We didn't buy spiral bound books, so this was a good reason not to buy this book because they were too fragile. And I did hear later from somebody where this happened that nobody ever checked out the book anyway because they never had a circulating copy other than to the people that objected to the book. So this was a behind the scenes gossip.
The irony is too, that as they identify books that they want to ban, that makes them people curious about what's in those books and they're more apt to read them.
Agreed.
Yeah, so.
It's authors are very happy when their books are banned because it just helps. They're laughing all the way to the bank.
Yeah.
Okay, no, wrong way. Legal battles, outside organizations, publishers are very concerned about this because they certainly don't want to have libraries not be allowed to buy the books they publish. It's going through the courts. I think most of them, I'm not, okay, I just checked the other day and they're not levels yet because you start at the lower levels, it goes up to the appellate and then it can go to the Supreme Court and we're not there yet. It very well could be there. The one thing that's been very interesting is that they have defined the things that allow you to censor a book. And people have very craftily found these things in the Bible. And so they're saying, if you are going to censor this book for X and X is in the Bible, well, why don't you censor the Bible? I suspect, and I can say it because it is in the Bible, is when Lot's daughters get their father drunk, so he will have sex with them so that the line will not die out. And so that they are getting other examples of this and saying, you want your kids to read this?
Mhm.
And it's very interesting. And again, we don't know where the current struggles are. It hasn't, I don't know where it's going to go. I'm sure that some of these cases will wind up in the Supreme Court. Okay, that's my part on changed for this presentation.
Two questions. One, you actually brought up, where do the drag queen story hours fall in terms of censorship or the legality or?
Okay, that, first of all, they're completely legal for part of the reason I said before is that if you follow the rules, you can present anything you want and there's nothing illegal about them.
Okay.
I guess what I'm concerned about a bit at times, the library becomes identified with wanting this to happen.
Okay, okay.
And I'm not sure that that is a good strategy. Legally, yes, there's nothing to stop it. There's nothing illegal about having a drag queen story hour. They follow the same rules of any other group. Yes, they can have library space to do
But
it.
it could irritate people who would,
Yeah.
you could draw attention and.
Yeah, it irritates people no end.
Okay, second question is, because I wasn't able to do this. Could you give an example of hate speech leading to violence and just comment more on that? Because
Okay, let's say you were in a bar and you started to say, let's get all the blankety blanks in the bar and they were attacked, that hate speech would be illegal.
okay,
If you just said and yelled at them, you're a bunch of blankety blanks,
okay,
and nothing happened, under US law at this point, that would not be illegal. As I said, though, they still might get beat up rather badly.
what if I said, you're a bunch of blankety blanks? And I mean, all my friends who are, like, yeah, they are blankety blanks, and so all my friends go, pound them up. Am I gonna?
You might be
does
guilty
that-
for having incited it by bringing the subject. Again, I'm not a lawyer, I wouldn't be
Okay.
100% sure.
Okay,
What I have a real problem with is that the Supreme Court in January 6th decided that the president who incited those people to go to the Capitol was absolved of all responsibility. And it was exactly the kind of incitement to violence
Right,
that you were talking about. And he did it and they were violent.
that is still going through the courts.
I thought it was already decided by the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court said he had immunity, but there's questions whether that immunity applies to what happened or not. So that piece, I think, is still going through the courts. It's not
Let's hope so.
completely a dead issue. It becomes a much more difficult issue to prove, because they would have to say it was not protected by being an official act of him as president.
Sure didn't seem like it.
2 points. Could you reference the incident with George Soros lying on his resume? And I guess he got bounced out of Congress because of that.
I suspect if he had wanted to stay, he could. It's not a legal problem. Congress has ways of getting rid of its members, and that's not the same as charging somebody with a crime. It would just say, this is against our ethics code. You can vote to get rid of him, but he would not be criminally prosecuted.
Okay, the other thing that's kind of terrifying is, you see any parallels between what's happening now in books and what happened in the 30s in Germany?
Let's hope not. Let's hope not. Yes, there's some scary parallels. But again, let's hope not.
Yeah.
I certainly don't want to see any bonfires in front of my public library.
Fahrenheit 451 was one of the scariest books I ever read. So,
Okay. All right, the other thing is what they're trying to control, anyway, okay, I think I already did the, okay. Okay, wait a minute, I'm going the wrong way.
Down, yep.
Okay, part of the issue here that I need to talk about is that there have been very strong changes in American culture. And so that oftentimes the public library has not reflected those changes. I would say that up into the 50s, 1950s, many of the things that right now we would defend, like objectionable materials, everybody just assumed that they were bad and they didn't get into the library. It is my contention that, going back a bit to history, that our Constitution is based upon the principles of the 18th century Enlightenment, in the sense that it was much more based on science, neutrality, free thought. If we had had our Constitution in 1820, it would have not surprised me if we had had an established religion in the Constitution. So that there were major changes in American culture between the time the Constitution was accepted and then the changes in the early 19th century, the 1810s, 1820s and onward. And those changes were basically accepted. These are the Comstock laws. There's no contraception, there's no divorce, there's no this, there's no that. And then that started to crack in the 50s and the 60s. And so I want to talk a little bit about this. And so that the values are different than what they were. And I just kind of give three, okay. We've expanded that to include a lot more on gender and racial equality, LGBTQ rights, and divorce. I mean, you were a pariah not too long ago if you got divorced. It was considered to be socially completely unacceptable. They would tell women who wanted to go to graduate school, we're not going to let you in. You're just going to get married and have babies and we'll have wasted all our money. And so those were the values that then started to change. We've also had some not okay issues that have been added. We certainly didn't deal with segregation for a long time. And I would say that we didn't do a good job in the North either.
We didn't do a good job with the Indians either.
Now we did a horrible job with them. Okay, if I'm gonna allow a 30-second pat on the back. I have Grapes of Wrath is given as one of the great books of social justice. And what it omits to say is that the Okies that it wanted social justice for were probably avid segregationists.
yeah, probably.
And I actually got that comment published in a national magazine where the writer of the column admitted that that was a good point, and she was glad that I had made it. And so we misogyny, we've less of that. We're against pollution. Smoking has certainly declined in acceptability. And then we got the contested areas. These are the contested areas where American culture is certainly divided. So reproductive rights, we all know that one. Everybody agrees, don't they? Pro-choice, pro-life, everybody just agrees. No. Gun control, I don't talk to me about that. All right, I'm just gonna say it. It's hard for me to read about we should ban pornography because of all of its harmful effects, when I certainly don't see them. And yet we can't control guns, and we have all of these killings and massacres and this and that, and they're both constitutionally protected. But in one case, we overlook all the bad effects, in the other case, oh God, and believe me, I'm researched in this area, and there are relatively few bad effects.
My boyfriend, Lenny Bruce, talks about that. I'm sure you're familiar with his talking about violence and
Right.
pornography, and you're almost as eloquent as he is on the subject.
all right, let me talk more about it. So what I'm saying is, especially in these areas, the public library needs to have materials on both sides of the question. And they should be good materials. They should be materials that have some support. So in other words, if it's factually correct, rather than just filled with, I don't know, the things they say on the internet. And what I like to give here is that we should have the viewpoints from both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and we should have the viewpoints both from MSNBC and Fox News. And so the person coming into the library should find materials on both sides of the question that are well prepared and are, how should I say it, factually accurate, though that's always a difficult thing to define.
Whose facts are they?
But, yes, yes. One of the things, and I haven't seen this too much, is that the library has normally expanded what it's collected when there is a group that stands up and says, we're your users, we're your valid users, and we want you to have these things in the library. And so the first one is the push for civil rights and desegregation in the 1960s. So we're having many more materials that reflect other ethnicities, other cultures, and other races. And so the library was pushed to change its policy. The 4 waves of feminism, so that women were rather poorly treated in lots of libraries. But when feminism came around, pushing to say, we want to see our stuff. We want Gloria Steinem in addition to the other people. And then the gay rights movement, that's been one of the major ones. I'm actually very surprised about the fact that the decision by the Supreme Court to legalize gay marriage has not had a greater effect in getting more tolerance for gays. And in many parts of the community, I don't see that tolerance having emerged, even with that important court decision. Rachel Carson and environmental justice, we still have a lot of people that, well, they either deny, well, we can't deny climate change. They said people aren't responsible for it. So that's a question. And then actually, I didn't know about this, that there were many libraries that did not buy Christian fiction until the 1960s. They were worried about the separation of church and state, but then the people who wanted to read Christian fiction said, why can't we have Christian fiction? And so I greatly support the fact that libraries added it. We have more concerns about arrival of the internet in the 1990s and personal privacy. And then if we're talking about the other side, there has been much more also of an attempt to remove hurtful speech. I don't think that Mark Twain should be censored.
You don't think what should be censored?
Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn,
Oh.
which is often censored for its use of that term, and I don't even have enough courage to say it, and I will just say the N-word. I got lambasted once because I was supposed to give an example of hate speech, and I did say the N-word, and my fellow librarians were very upset with me, so I'm not going to upset you.
Yeah, good choice, good choice.
Some of your remarks gave me pause to think back when I was taking history, and I read about the platform points of the Know Nothing Party.
Right.
And these included anti-immigration sentiment, anti-Catholicism, anti-Irish sentiment, anti-German sentiment, cultural assimilation.
Okay, most people today are not aware of the virulent prejudice against Catholics in the 19th century. The story I tell is the Pope sent a marble block for the Washington Monument, and they took it and pushed it into the Potomac River. And so there have been the anti-Catholic, can I say it because it was in PBS or not? There's a PBS special that said that the Okies were completely flabbergasted when the sign said, no niggers or Okies need apply. And so that they were so used to being on top that the fact that they were segregated, and this, I'm saying it because this appeared on NPR. Okay, selection versus censorship. This is one of the most important issues because it is true that there is virtually no library that can buy everything. And so that the librarians who select the materials or delegate the selection to the publishers need to be aware that they are getting the materials they need to meet their community needs. And so selection should not glide into censorship where you don't get anything and you're just saying, we're selecting what our patrons want, like the person that said, we have no gays in my community. So that becomes a censorship error. And it also should, the information of the, it should not also reflect the viewpoints only of the political and social leaders. This is something that also happens. The mayor wants only X, or the city council wants only Y, and it's all going to be about economic development. What do the people want? Genre fiction. Probably the most popular items in the library are going to be its romance novels.
No, can't be.
And so the library doesn't go and say, Mayor, we need more funding to buy more romance novels. They go to the mayor and say, we need more funding for economic development, when the librarian really knows we need more money for romance novels. And the best thing to do, and it'll be the next talk, is that you're part of the talk. You need to have a formal selection policy. And so these should be guidelines for selection. It should be neutral in keeping with the First Amendment. So in other words, content cannot determine. It can't say, and we won't buy any books on abortion. Now, on the other hand, this doesn't always happen. You're looking at the person who, in his resume, lists the book Sex in Library. And it turns out that many public libraries really don't even want to buy legitimate sexual materials without any pornographic content, just to help kids get the information they need to know growing up. And I had a quote that stated that this is something that lots of public libraries don't do. I actually think that's a bad mistake, and that you should have this type of materials. The policy should be publicly available, so that anybody who wants to know, this is what we say we're going to do. We say that we're going to cover both sides of the question. We won't, for example, often the policy will say that we will cover objective materials on the various religions. We will not buy materials that say, that whose main purpose is to say, if you're not one of our religion's members, you're going to hell. And so those could be considered not proper for most public libraries. And you should also deal with about patron requests. There will be patrons who will come in, and their goal will be to get more things that are in favor of their positions within reason, probably some of those requests, but not all of them. It also should be that somebody else is going to check it out. So if you get a request that you're sure from past experience that nobody is going to check out and you're not lying, that would be a reason for not purchasing an item. It also might be a reason if it's very expensive. And so also the issue of gifts, that you should have a statement, and most libraries do, that you're not obligated to add every single gift that you get. I believe, is it the Christian, who gives all the materials out, mails it out? Christian Scientists or?
Yeah, they do.
Okay, so if you want.
Scientology too.
Christian Science, they go, what?
Scientology too.
Scientology too. And so you are not obligated to include those materials in your collection. it might be to your advantage to include some of the better selected materials. The best thing is that it should be stuff that your users want. If you've got the next Grisham novel, yes, you're going to get it. If you go get the thing and you suddenly have 25 holds on it, that's what you should be paying attention to. So certain authors, subjects, and genres. So if something, I don't know, what would be a popular subject right today? Anybody suggestions? What would, I don't know, the electoral process. Yeah. It would be good to have that from both points of view. Also, many places have it, should routinely buy things on bestseller lists. So if it's on the New York Times bestseller list, you get it unless it's Sex by Madonna. In that case, you found a way not to get it. Those that have received important awards. This is, I think, almost a scam at points, because I was involved in a reward process at Wayne State. And I believe we got more books. The library did not have this award, but we got to keep the books. And I think that the books we got cost more than the value of the award that the author got. And I'm not sure many libraries bought many of the books just because it got this tribute. But awards are important. Many places have a requirement that there needs to be a certain number of favorable reviews before they purchase the items. One of the issues on that is you may not be aware, when we talk about the number of titles, the number of titles of self-published books is about 50 to 70% of the book output in the United States. That is not the dollar amount. The dollar amount is still from the major publishers, but this requirement for reviews has made it difficult for some libraries to add quite good self-published materials to their collections. And that's been another one of my research areas. And also cost, it can be a consideration. If you or somebody comes in and they want what you consider to be a marginal book and it costs $20, that can be a valid reason for getting it, but you wouldn't get it if it cost $100. And so one of the issues that libraries face, and I don't consider this censorship, is you've got somebody that's interested in a very niche topic and wants you to buy everything out there. And so every week they show up with another list of stuff they want you to get, and nobody else checks it out. And that is a valid reason for not getting it, and I would not consider that to be censorship. Also, there are also some cases, especially for children's books, that you don't buy them because they're too fragile. So the pop-up books are very expensive, and yet they seldom last more than a circulation or two, or the art books with loose prints that people are going to steal the first time it's set out. And so that is also valid. Again, I think it's a valid reason. I hope libraries don't use it as an excuse. It also is a preference for local authors. I would hope that if you have people who write self-published books who live in Dearborn, and they come into the library, that the library buys them because they are Dearborn authors. And that, to me, is, again, a valid reason, unless they're really awful. The publishers still send the authors out on tours, media publicity, library visits, and so they're trying to create demand. If the demand appears, yes, you should get it. And finally, format. I don't think that this library should buy any more VHS tapes. Probably shortly they shouldn't be buying any CDs either. So as format changes, you should get rid of the old formats, throw them away. Maybe they'll be valuable if you don't throw them away. And they switch toward digital versions. I'm reading a book from my public library right now on Kindle.
Are libraries prevented from getting unlimited numbers of digital books because the authors and the publishers don't want that available?
Okay, let me explain that. There's a recent court case. Digital books are just fine if they're treated the same way as print books. So the digital copy I have is something that was bought as a digital copy by the library. and only I have it until I'm finished reading it. There's a group called the Internet Archive that was making the case that if we have the book in print, we can make a digital copy. And as long as we only circulate it one at a time, it's legal. And I was the one that 10 years ago at a conference didn't think that that was legal. And my view was just vindicated within the last 2 weeks. And part of the reason is that they were saying, well, we'll make all these books from the 1930s available. But if it were legal, it would also be illegal for the current bestseller, in which the library could have its patrons donated 10 copies of the recent bestseller and then say, we can digitize those and circulate them, when the publisher is charging more for the digital book than for the print book. And yet there's no distinction in the copyright law, whether it was published yesterday or published in 1935. Did what I say just make sense?
No, kind of, a little bit. I think, I got confused.
Okay, right now, publishers charge more for digital books than they charge for print books, because they would get repeat sales from the library as the print books wore out. So if you got the bestseller and it circulated 20 times, it's probably ready for the scrap heap. But if you buy the digital copy, you can keep it forever and it will never be damaged. And so they don't have to buy multiple copies. Oh, yes, and the other reason why they have to buy it, that bestseller's on the shelf, people steal it. And so they have to replace the stolen copies, and the digital copy cannot be stolen. So the publishers, knowing that they get revenue, less revenue from digital than print, priced digital higher, and the courts decided that there were valid reasons for pricing it higher, and said that the Internet Archive can't do that, to the consternation of many librarians.
In the 30s, maybe in the 20s, Henry Ford had this newspaper and it had anti-Semitic editorials. The libraries have to have that, or has it been destroyed, or what?
Okay, it's not illegal. I would say it would be dangerous to have the material. That I think could be said, we're not going to buy it for selection reasons. Okay, I have just been told, all right, I'm gonna run over a little. Access to the internet is probably the most serious problem for libraries. Because the courts have determined that anything that's legal on the internet, if you provide internet access, it is legal for your patrons to access. And pornography on the internet is legal. So the court cases have said, if the patron walks up to the librarian that has a filter or anything in the library, they can say, I want you to remove the filter. And the library is violating the law, even if the patron is going to watch pornography. On the other hand, you don't want other patrons to see that. And so there is some support for you having special screen guards or special area, and all you can do is look. You do anything else and it's got on the security cameras, you can be arrested. But that is one of the most troublesome things. Again, talked about adult pornography, extreme violence, hate speech, and only viewing a public library that does not follow this policy can be sued. This came up once on our local library discussion list when they said, we caught somebody looking at pornography, how long can we ban them from the library? And I kind of replied and said, you can't ban them from the library. I got hate speech. It's the only time in my life I've ever got hate speech. But it's the law. On the other hand, most people are, what should I say? Shy isn't the right word. They don't want to be offensive, so it doesn't happen all that often. On the other hand, it does happen at times. You got somebody who's mad at the world and they're in the library and they fix it up so the next person that comes in and presses the key gets this horrible pornographic image that they didn't want to see. So this is perhaps the most complicated. Okay, challenges, I'm gonna run through this quickly. Should have a defined policy. Most of the time, it should be, available only from somebody that lives in your community. So if you as a Dearborn resident want to challenge it, they pay attention. If somebody from a national organ wants to challenge it, you say, you're not a member, we don't need to deal with it. But as I said, the outside organizations are now telling people who live in your community how to do it and how to do it successfully.
Is that, sorry, Nan, is that like a recommendation you're giving, or is that?
Pardon?
Is there a legal basis for ensuring that folks outside of the community are not able to challenge?
It's something that you can do, yeah. It would be legally possible to say that, there is no legal doctrine that says you have to have a challenge policy, and so you can set the rules for your challenge policy.
Thank you.
You should have a form, the clear reasons. Most of the time you ask if you read the complete book. We had something censored in Utah, and you can tell exactly what the pages were because they were dirty. And what is the desired outcome? The other thing is that you should be respectful. You should try to acknowledge that they may have a good point. You shouldn't tell them you're a dumb oaf, unintellectual oaf for trying to remove this book from the library. It's not going to win you friends, and it's not going to help with the challenge process. So be respectful, try to acknowledge their point of view. You don't have to agree with it. And the book should be available for the patrons while the challenge process is underway. The review committee, who chairs, I'm going to go very fast through this. I actually think that one of the best things you can do on the challenge committee is have a member of the local clergy or some respected members of the community, because you don't want the person to feel who brought the challenge that they're just facing a stacked jury where they can't win. And so it should be a real reasonable chance to do it, even if in most cases the book will remain on the shelves. There are actually some cases where you might have reasons for removing the book. And again, one of the other things that, the timeline, can the complainant, description of an appeal process, the press may come in and you have to have some sense of what you're going to tell the press. The press is often very sneaky. They will come and try to talk to somebody who's the clerk at the reception desk to get what they want to put in their paper rather than what you would say if you were the director. So the staff should be told if anybody comes in talking about this issue, send them to the director. And then involve the community. I wish that when we have challenges, the people on the other side who believe that they or their children should have access to these materials should speak out. Again, most requests are directed against materials for youth. One of the things I discovered in my research is that parents and children don't understand each other. And when they ask parents, are your high school children having sex? 90% of the children said no. And the real answer is 50% of them are having sex. On the other hand, when they also ask the kids, have your parents ever committed adultery? 90% of the kids say no. And the figure there is also about 50%. So we have a very good don't ask, don't tell policy. So most children in high school are not as innocent as their parents think they are. The one thing that public library can do is if the parent objects strongly, then you tell the parent that you come in with your kids and you supervise their activities. So if you don't want them to do X, you just come to the library and make sure they don't do X. Some libraries have restrictions on what the parent and the children can check out. So in other words, the card is flagged, you don't allow to do whatever. And there's some times where minor access to the adult collection, I don't know what to say there. There's also an opposite restriction, and with the fear of predators, there are some places where say that adults without children can't be found in the children's collection either. These are some of the thornier issues. And then some, have, again, and some have only upon request. I am old enough to have gone to the Toledo Public Library and say, oh, yes, we will give you this material from the locked collection. I'll go get the key. I already mentioned that. The second one is actually something that many libraries don't understand. You cannot use the MPAA ratings as a way to restrict access to materials because it is a private body and private bodies cannot be used to censor library materials. On the other hand, you also aren't supposed to cover up the labels for people that want to use it.
What is
So I
the
know that some,
MPAA?
what?
What's the MPAA?
Motion
That's
picture.
our NC, that's our PG 13.
Oh,
Yeah.
what does it stand, what does MPAA?
Motion picture.
Motion picture,
Association of America.
thank you.
Okay, and so, but you can't use that, but on the other hand, you're also not supposed to. Some vendors promise to supply only safe materials. I've heard them speak, anything you buy from me won't get you in trouble. But again, I said it restricts the exploration of important topics and, kids need to grow up. I know they're growing up more slowly these days. I'm not sure that, I guess I wish. Beyond banned books is still not the big issue. I think it's really, the second part may be one of my key points. That the role of the library is to provide material that can potentially cause concern in the community, but they can open up the viewpoints to people that might be interested in them. And it also is incorrect to say that we shouldn't have any ethnic materials because we don't have any members of that ethnic group in our community, because you may have other users who are curious about that ethnic group. And the other thing is, I'm worried about the fact that we have too many librarians that are smug. We've defended all those banned books and we should get all this credit. And the difficult issue may be, maybe you get to get those sex education materials that you don't want to get, even if nobody's trying to ban them. That you should push the envelope as much as you possibly can. And I think, as I said, we as a profession are often too smug. Okay, I'm going to, let's go back. These are my things. You need to meet the information needs and also the reading needs of your community. You can change things based upon your community, but you need to respect the fact that there will be various viewpoints in your community. And so just because you have, and there are communities like this, 90% of the people believe X, you should still have some things that are for Y for those people within the community. You don't need to have as many, but you need to have some. And as we all know, right now, we are a divided society with people having very different viewpoints. And I believe that it is possible to, you should have those viewpoints represented. And as I will repeat again, I strongly support representing viewpoints that I don't like at all, but they still should be in the library. I'm going to maybe say something strange. I have been subscribed to the Wall Street Journal for 40 years, precisely because it presents viewpoints to me that I would otherwise not encounter and sometimes make great sense. And I feel it's a window on the world where I don't agree all the time, but I like to hear these viewpoints, and as I say, they sometimes make sense. All right, this is my, okay, all right. Again, the library should have, can go to find materials that support their viewpoints and also oppose their viewpoints. So my two principles at the end is that the response to bad speech is more speech, not getting rid of the bad speech. And lots of people have trouble with that one. And the last one is probably the most important. A truly great library contains something in it both to please and offend everyone. And here we are at the end.